One of BMC's most costly failures, the 1800 was a car that, externally, gave the impression of a big and ungainly machine being shoehorned into the mid-size family car bracket, but going beyond its deceptive dimensions, the BMC 1800 proved to be one of the most advanced cars of its class, and a much-loved example of simple but sturdy engineering as engendered by the famous Sir Alec Issigonis. The BMC 1800 began life following the start of development for the earlier BMC 1100, which was now in the latter stages of its conception and moving steadily towards full-scale production. What would become the 1800 being conceived as an answer to the mid-range Farina cars of the late 1950s. However, unlike past models, where BMC would rebody an existing car and launch it under a plethora of badge-engineered variations, the project, dubbed the codename ADO-17, was to produce an entirely new car from the wheels up, and would be configured to follow the same transverse engine and transmission in sump arrangement as the Mini and the 1100. The larger car would thus be built around the 1.5-litre B-Series engine and, as such, would directly replace the 1.5-litre Farinas and boost the popularity of the mid-range BMCs in a manner similar as to how the Mini and the 1100 had done for the small car bracket, a concept that, in one form or another, had dated back to 1956 under Sir Alec Issigonis, and was previously denoted as XC9000, this taking place prior to his redirection of efforts by BMC chairman Sir Leonard Lord into the development of the Mini. Upon his return to the mid-size family car project in the autumn of 1958, Issigonis chose to eschew some of his less favoured aspects from the XC9000, including its original rear-wheel drive configuration, though many aspects of this earlier concept did ultimately make it aboard the ADO-17, such as its long wheelbase in relation to the length of the car, and quite elegant Citroen-esque styling. Following the successful development of Project XC9003, which would ultimately come to pass as the Mini, and with the Farina mid-range cars being hurried into production as a short-term replacement for the XC9000 in the midst of fuel rationing implemented by the Suez Crisis, Issigonis chose to adopt a front-wheel drive transmission for what was now dubbed XC9001, and, in short order, a prototype was soon built to appear under the same codename. The XC9001 carried many aesthetic aspects over from the XC9000, but due to the car looking somewhat like an elongated Mini, the BMC management instructed that the basic car needed a restyle, and thus, as the styling house of choice at BMC at the time was Pininfarina, they were invited to forward their own version of the car. In the autumn of that year, two competing XC9001 prototypes were evaluated, the first being a Pininfarina proposal that looked like an enlarged BMC 1100, while the second one, produced in-house, was a much larger car and followed a style that appeared more representative of the final design, incorporating its characteristic six-light bodywork and cropped fins. In the end, the BMC management chose to pursue the in-house option, the rationale being that the bigger car would make better use of the upcoming enlarged version of the B-Series engine, while the development of the MGB sports car had required the enlargement of the B-Series engine from 1.6 to 1.8 litres, as the new car was turning out to be heavier than anticipated. It was this decision to switch to the larger version of the engine that influenced the company's thinking in going with the larger proposal, and in so doing, the project began to move away from its desired market slot as a replacement for the Farina, and thus, instead of keeping the dimensions of the car to the same level as those of its predecessor, and consistent with the rest of the cars in its class, Issigonis grew the car's length and width to take full advantage of the enlarged 1.8-litre engine. The wheelbase of the car was now 106 inches, approximately 6 inches longer than the car it was supposed to replace, though in reality, the car's actual dimensions made it over 10 inches shorter than the Farina, thus giving proportions and size perception to the customer that made it look larger than it actually was. This isn't to say that the car's interior was deceptively large, as with the extended wheelbase, the cabin accommodation was very impressive, rivaling much larger cars such as the Austin Westminster, and although George Harriman replaced Leonard Lord as BMC chairman midway through development of the ADO-17, he continued to have complete confidence in the judgment of his design chief at Longbridge, believing that the 1.8-litre car would be exactly what the market wanted, and thus trusting that Issigonis could deliver as promised. Unfortunately, as progress continued at pace, Issigonis and BMC had failed to note the trends among buyers in the post-Suez Crisis market, with only a mere 5% of cars sold in 1960 being of the 1.7 to 1.8-litre sector, while 19.6% were between 1.4 and 1.5 litres, a statistic that didn't go unnoticed by Ford's UK product planners, as led by Terry Beckett. However, work moved on regardless, and during 1959, Pininfarina, despite losing the commission to deliver the ADO 17 styling, had been tasked with tidying up the in-house design of BMC's departments, leading in June 1960 to a new version of the car now dubbed the XC9005. To develop BMC's cars, Issigonis had adopted a cell system, wherein each cell comprised a group of engineers with responsibility for a particular model. The A cell, headed by Jack Daniels, being responsible for Mini development, the B cell, led by Chris Kingham, being tasked with developing the ADO 17, and the C cell, led by Charles Griffin, being responsible for the ADO 16, which was under development at Cowley until the team moved to Longbridge in May 1962. With the development of the ADO 16 centred at Cowley, Issigonis was only able to check up on progress once a week, usually Thursdays, thus enabling Charles Griffin to have a relatively free hand, while due to development of the ADO 17 being based at Longbridge, Alec Issigonis was able to adopt a more hands-on approach. The appearance and execution of the ADO 17 was already set in the mind of Issigonis as it had been since 1958, but the trouble was that, as development on the car continued, it moved further and further away from being the car that could replace the Farina saloons on the marketplace, and after their successful work on the ADO 16, Pininfarina was involved in the latter stages of the car's styling program, and would prove to be responsible for some of the last-minute revisions to the design of the ADO 17. The problem was, as the BMC management was fully convinced of their in-house product, Pininfarina had their hands tied when it came to amendments to a machine that looked very similar to the Austin variants of the upcoming ADO 16, leading to superficial changes that extended only to the headlights, grille and front wings, while the centre section was generally untouched from the 1958 proposal. In terms of power, the four-cylinder engine was basically the 1.8-litre version of the B-series engine found in the MGB, but in the standard single carburettor incarnation, it was seen as being too unrefined for use in a saloon car. Thus, in pursuit of that extra refinement, it was reworked completely to take a 5-bearing crankshaft, despite the fact that the engine had only recently been bored out to 1.8 litres. Otherwise, the development process of the 1800 followed the same course as the 1100, with the exception of removing the subframe, while minor refinements were implemented in the gearbox, with the transmission being set further back in relationship with the engine, the removal of the subframe assemblies being done due to Issigonis' insistence that they added weight and cost, as well as having bad experiences with them while testing the prototype Mini. In the ADO 17, the front suspension and engine were mounted directly to the body, leading to an incredibly stiff structure, while the previous Mini and 1100 used the subframes to add strength, and also served as an effective insulation from road-induced noise. Prior to the release of the 1800 into sales, press cars were made available in July and August 1964, with 16 pre-production vehicles being driven around Scotland by motoring journalists, the critical reception being very warm to the new model, and many observers considered that it would be yet another triumph in the marketplace for Alec Issigonis and BMC. Sadly, when the 1800 was launched in October 1964, the resultant car proved to be faster, heavier, much wider, and more expensive than the car it was designed to replace, the BMC management being less than impressed with the new model, and thus kept the Farinas in production, regardless of the fact that these machines made little profit due to their long outdated underpinnings and late 1950s style. Nevertheless, the Farinas continued to provide a vital bridge in the market between the smaller 1100 and the oversized 1800, as while the new car was an engineering feat when it came to space efficiency, the inescapable fact was that it was larger than the buyer of a mid-size car was looking for at the time, particularly in relation to its width. However, regardless of all these concerns relating to the car's size, BMC chairman George Harriman accepted the advice given to him by the highly influential dealers, who considered that the 1800 was still capable of achieving a sales rate of 4,000 units per week, with production targets being initially set at 2,500 new cars per week before rising to 4,000. The working life of the 1800 would be 150,000 miles, as supported by low depreciation rates and a 10-year model run, though the reality was that the car had been priced far too steeply for its mid-size market segment, which only compounded its existing size and perception woes, the 1800 costing 14% more than the Austin Cambridge, and was pitched at a point in the range where it would complement the much larger Austin Westminster. In the end, the car's roomy interior could not distract from the fact that customers were not interested in the bulky 1800, either as a car in its own right or a replacement for the Farina, and soon it became apparent that the sales rate of 4,000 units per week would never be met, the 1800 not being offered through the entire dealer network, with the Austin dealers getting the first examples on their forecourts in September 1964, while a badge-engineered Morris version wouldn't appear until 1966. This was a move that replicated the earlier 1100, wherein half of the dealer network, and potentially half of a customer base that was extremely brand loyal, was cut off for over 2 years, the BMC management having not learned their lesson from the 1100 as they continued to maintain the Austin-centric mindset that had been carried over from the days of Leonard Lord. In the end, by the time the Morris and Wolseley versions of the car had made their appearance in March 1966 and March 1967 respectively, it was more than obvious that the 1800 had truly failed to meet its ambitious forecasts of over 200,000 cars per annum, and instead was struggling to manage a modest 40,000 units per year throughout the middle of the decade, while by as early as October 1965, critical perceptions of the car had become scathing, and the machine was considered dull and drab for its cost and size. Aside from the car's odd styling and somewhat inappropriate proportions, the 1800 was also burdened with a compromised driving position akin to that found on the Mini and the 1100, and had unacceptably heavy and low-geared steering, Issigonis believing that there would be no need for power steering, as none of its domestic rivals were equipped with this feature, the only comparable car at the time with front-wheel drive being the Citroën DS, which came with power-assisted steering as standard. Beyond its design flaws, the 1800 was also plagued with reliability concerns, its most notable trait being its propensity to burn oil at an alarming rate, a problem that took a considerable amount of time to cure and was attributed to the car being overfilled with oil due to its incorrectly calibrated dipstick. Again, the press quickly picked up on this unfortunate habit, and the 1800 was scorned across the marketplace, customer confidence in the machine collapsing, though BMC would push forward in fixing these concerns, regardless of the fact that, by 1969, its reputation had been truly soured, with no chance of redemption, while stories of BMC dealers being overwhelmed by complaints from 70,000 first-batch examples made for eager reading in the motoring press. Such was the drop-off in sales for the 1800 that its peak production year, from 1965 to 1966, saw 56,876 units built, but by the end of 1966, only 70,000 examples overall had been delivered, while the extent of badge engineering among BMC's ranks only reached the Morris 1800 and the upmarket Wolseley 1885, considerations as to a potential Riley model being dropped as it was feared it would clash with the Wolseley. Ultimately, any further variants of the 1800 were dropped before they were even conceptualized, a simple result of the machine's shambolic commercial performance, the only dedicated work to improve the breed coming in the form of a possible estate version, though this was ruled out due to fears it would clash with the traveller version of the Morris Oxford, and because the ADO 14, later known as the Austin Maxi, would soon be completed as a dedicated hatchback in the model range. Another close call was the Vanden Plas 1800, as developed by Kingsbury, who reworked the concept to resemble the Australian Austin X6 Tasman and Kimberley version of the car, eschewing the somewhat awkward styling in favour of a machine that looked decidedly different from the conventional Austin and Morris machines that were lagging so poorly in the marketplace. Unfortunately, the Vanden Plas 1800, though showing great promise, fell victim to the merger of BMC with the Leyland Group to form British Leyland in 1968, as with the entry of the Rover and Triumph marques into the company ranks, the 1800 would have simply been a needless exercise of internal competition, regardless of the fact that the Rover P6 and its Triumph 2000 stablemate would conduct their own private sales war with each other well into the 1970s. Eventually, in March 1972, the first major mechanical addition to the 1800 range was made with the launch of the 2.2-litre E-Series variant, utilising an engine that had already seen service in the Australian Austin X6 that had been launched in 1970, the E-Series being a six-cylinder version of the power plant used in the Austin Maxi, which in four-cylinder configuration had been designed as compact as possible so as to open up potential six-cylinder options without expanding its physical dimensions. Therefore, with the stretched six-cylinder power unit yoked sideways into the 1800 engine bay, the resultant car emerged as the Wolseley 6, a superb luxury version that exploited the innate spaciousness of the 1800 range, while the six-cylinder E-Series power plant, despite being the product of many compromises, was a smooth and sublime power unit for its time. Ultimately, the 1800 by the middle of the decade was simply being kept alive to cover for the protracted development of the stylish and futuristic ADO 71, which would appear in 1975 as the hydrogas-fitted 1800 and 2200, later known as the Princess, the 10-year production run of the 1800 in all its guises, leading to a meagre 387,283 units assembled, a fraction of the numbers built by comparable cars from other builders such as the Citroën DS and the Ford Cortina. In summary, the 1800 or ADO 17 failed on a number of levels, being ill-suited for the mid-size car market it was hoping to appeal to by having an engine that was too big, costing significantly more than the rival Ford Cortina, and being too large in terms of physical dimensions for the expected customer base, instead crossing swords with larger 3-litre saloons that were on offer at the time, and thus finding no interest from potential buyers who couldn't understand which market segment it resided in. Nevertheless, those who procured the 1800 would have been presented with yet another masterclass of space efficiency in a manner almost identical to the Mini, with Issigonis once again working his expertise to create a car that gave over as much use of its available platform to the driver and passengers as possible, though this facet alone could not save the 1800 from its inevitable commercial failure.